One night, I found myself driving through the Canadian Rockies, miles from the nearest town. I had just passed through a tiny, almost forgotten place, a single gas station and a couple of dimly lit houses. The rest of the highway was pitch black, with only my headlights cutting through the dense darkness. The road was eerily quiet, and the further I drove, the more isolated it felt. No cars, no signs of life, just me and the black void of the mountains. After a while, the urge to pull over hit me. I hadn't seen another vehicle for hours, and I was pretty sure I'd passed the last rest stop without even noticing. No big deal, I figured the highway was deserted, so I could just stop on the side of the road for a quick break. I needed to pee, and I could use a smoke too. I pulled over, turned off the engine, and stepped out into the cold night air. The stillness was unnerving. It was that kind of silence where even the sound of your own breathing feels too loud. The stars were faint through the cloud cover, and the dark tree line just beyond the road loomed like a wall of shadows. As I stood there, taking care of business, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, but I brushed it off. It was probably just my imagination running wild. Once I was done, I leaned against my car, lit up a cigarette, and stared into the endless black. It was peaceful, in a way, until it wasn't. Out of nowhere, I saw movement, just on the edge of the tree line. My heart skipped a beat. At first, I thought maybe it was a deer or some other wildlife, but then I saw it. It wasn't an animal. It was a man. A figure, slowly walking out of the woods, straight toward me. I froze for a second, my cigarette hanging from my lips. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Why would anyone be out here, miles from civilization, in the dead of night? I quickly stamped out my cigarette, my eyes fixed on the figure. There was something off about the way he moved, deliberate, almost mechanical, like he was in no hurry at all. I calmly made my way back to the driver's side of the car, forcing myself not to sprint. The man was still coming, his silhouette clearer now. His clothes were dark, almost blending with the night, and his face was shadowed, but I could make out enough to know he wasn't just passing through. He was heading straight for me. I slid into the driver's seat and locked the doors, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. I had the engine running in seconds, ready to peel out if things went south. But something kept me there, curiosity or maybe just plain fear, I don't know. I kept my eyes on the man, my heart pounding in my chest, each second dragging out like an eternity. He walked right up to my passenger side door and stopped, staring through the window. Then, he knocked. Not a hard, panicked knock, just a soft, steady tapping, like he was trying to get my attention without scaring me off. Against every bit of instinct screaming at me to drive away, I cracked the window just slightly, keeping my foot on the brake, ready to hit the gas. "What's up?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though my hands were trembling on the steering wheel. The man looked at me, his face expressionless but his eyes hollow, like he hadn't slept in days. When he spoke, his voice was low and serious, almost too calm. "I need you to call the cops," he said. A chill ran down my spine. I didn't know if this was a trick or if he was genuinely in trouble. "Why?" I asked, my eyes darting to his hands, looking for any sign of a weapon. He hesitated for a moment, then spoke in that same flat tone. "I went out into the woods to end it. But I couldn't do it. I thought of my daughters." His voice cracked slightly at the mention of his daughters, and for the first time, his emotion broke through. I couldn't go through with it. I didn't know what to say. I glanced down and saw it, a kitchen knife in his hand. The blade gleamed faintly in the moonlight. My pulse raced, and I gripped the wheel tighter, ready to bolt if he made any sudden moves. "Listen," I said, my voice low and calm, trying not to provoke him. "You should put the knife down." He stared at the knife for a moment, like he'd forgotten he was even holding it. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he bent down and placed it on the ground beside the car. I called the cops, keeping an eye on him the whole time. He didn't move, just stood there, staring out into the darkness, his shoulders slumped like the weight of the world was on them. Every now and then, he'd wipe his eyes with the back of his hand, but he didn't say much else. As we waited for the police to arrive, the night seemed to stretch on forever. The silence between us was deafening, broken only by the distant sounds of the wind rustling through the trees. The cold crept into the car, but I didn't dare turn the heater on. I kept the engine running, my foot hovering over the gas pedal, just in case. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, flashing lights appeared in the distance. The man didn't move, didn't say a word. The police pulled up, and 2 officers got out, approaching cautiously. I told them about the knife, and they handled it from there. Before they took him away, I rolled down the window and called out to him. He looked back at me, his eyes tired but grateful. "Take care of yourself," I said, my voice catching in my throat. He nodded, but said nothing, as the officers guided him toward the patrol car. I sat there for a while after they left, just staring out into the empty road, wondering what would have happened if I hadn't stopped to take that break. I still think about that man from time to time, hoping he found a way to make things right. But that night left me with a deep, lingering unease, because sometimes, the scariest things aren't what's lurking in the dark, but the people you meet along the way. I've been a truck driver for nearly 15 years, and one particular night in 2018 still stands out. I was on a night run, hauling appliances across the Mojave Desert, traveling from California into Arizona. The route was familiar, but my truck's headlights were dim, something I'd meant to fix for a while. Normally, it wasn't a huge issue, but in the vast emptiness of the desert, the problem was painfully clear. With no other cars around, I strived to see the road. I debated pulling over and waiting for daylight, but time was money, and I couldn't afford any delays. It was a straight shot to my destination, so I decided to push through, figuring I'd be fine. About an hour before sunrise, something suddenly appeared ahead. Startled, I slammed on the brakes, thinking I was about to hit an animal. When the truck finally stopped, I saw a car parked directly in the center of the road, its hazard lights blinking. It was straddling the double yellow lines, and the passenger door was wide open. I'd stopped just inches short of crashing into it. I'm not easily shaken, I've seen plenty in my years on the road, but this was odd. My first instinct wasn't fear. I was more curious. Maybe someone needed help, a jump start, or something. I reversed a little and pulled over to the side, considering whether to set up flares, but decided against it since the road had been deserted for miles. I got out and approached the car. The desert was unusually still, no wind, no sounds, except for the faint ticking of the car's hazard lights. As I got closer, I noticed something unsettling. The car, a newer red Ford Fusion, was empty. The passenger door was wide open, yet no one was inside. I checked all around, even peering into the back seat, but the car was deserted. That's when the unease kicked in. Something wasn't right. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I started glancing around, feeling as if I were being watched. My truck's dim headlights barely illuminated the road behind me, making the desert around us feel even darker. Despite my better judgment, I decided to investigate a bit further. The car seemed normal enough, keys in the ignition, but the engine wasn't running. I walked around to the back and tried the trunk, but it was locked. I grabbed the key from the ignition and attempted to open it, but something inside was jamming it shut. I unlocked the back seat and reached through to release the trunk. Inside, I found 3 tightly packed garbage bags and a rope that had been used to tie the trunk closed. I was about to examine the bags when suddenly, a deafening gunshot pierced the night. Startled, I jerked back, hitting my head on the car's roof. My heart raced as I tossed the keys back into the front seat and dashed toward my truck. As I scrambled into the cab, I heard someone shouting, their voice growing closer. It was a gravelly voice, yelling, "Hey!" over and over. I fired up the engine, but it stalled for a moment, just long enough for me to see him, a stocky man with red hair, dressed in overalls and boots, standing near the car's trunk. In one hand, he held a shovel. In the other, a hunting rifle. Our eyes met for a brief moment. He didn't look crazy, but there was a tense expression on his face. He dropped the shovel and started waving his hands, shouting, "Wait!" But there was no way I was sticking around. I floored it, speeding off down the highway. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I saw him chasing after me before turning back to his car. I thought I was in the clear, but then headlights appeared behind me, coming up fast. My pulse quickened as the car closed in, honking frantically. I grabbed my phone and called the police, trying to explain what was happening. But before they could respond, the car cut in front of me, forcing me to slow down. Just as I braced for a collision, I saw flashing police lights up ahead. The car swerved off the road and disappeared into the desert. Relieved, I pulled over and waited for the officer to arrive. I explained everything, expecting them to chase after the guy. But instead, the officer just took my statement and assured me they'd handle it. I never heard back from the police, no follow-up, nothing. When I told my friends, they all had wild theories. Some think the guy was out there burying bodies, but the bags I saw in the trunk weren't big enough for something like that. Maybe it was something even more sinister. Whatever it was, that night left me with a lingering dread of driving through the desert after dark. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, so you never miss out on new content. And if you know someone who would benefit from this, feel free to share it with them. Your support means the world to me and helps the channel grow. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.